For years, I believed I was doing everything right, balancing my career, my marriage, and motherhood with precision. My husband, Jeff, was my anchor, always supportive, always present, while I threw myself into work, determined to prove my worth. He took care of the home, our children, and all the little things I overlooked, never once making me feel guilty for my ambition. I reassured myself that my sacrifices were temporary, that one day, everything would pay off. I can't pretend I'm enjoying this. Competing for a managerial position in my office has been brutal. I've done everything I can to stand out, but I don't know if it's enough. This promotion is my chance to step into leadership, to finally have a real voice in the company. I've wanted this for so long. I wish I could say I earned my advantage through hard work alone, but that would be a lie. For the past 2 months, I've been sleeping with my boss. I hate myself for it, but I told myself it was necessary. I'm not the prettiest candidate. I don't have a perfect body. I can't stay late every night or drop everything for last-minute travel. Other women in this race don't have those limitations. But I have a family, and this job could change everything for us. Jeff, my husband, is everything to me. He takes care of the kids, the house, everything, while I focus on my career. He never complains, never asks for anything. He just supports me no matter what. I love him so much it physically hurts, which only makes what I'm doing worse. But I can't stop. My ambition is too strong. I want this more than anything. I want to be in that boardroom, making decisions, standing among powerful people. At almost 40, I know this is my last real shot. I thought the worst was behind me once my boss, Ken, recommended me for the role. I was wrong. Now, he expects me to spend the weekend with him at a seminar where top executives will be watching me. It's an opportunity I can't afford to pass up, but I know exactly what he wants in return. I brought this on myself. I made the first move, after all. This was never about love. Ken loves his wife. I love Jeff. For him, it's just love. For me, it was leverage, but now it feels like a trap. Tonight, I have to go home and ask Jeff, the man who does everything for me, to let me leave again. He deserves so much better than this. When I pull into the driveway, he's outside washing his car, the way he always does in the summer. He greets me with a smile, takes my briefcase, kisses me like I'm the only woman in the world. His touch is warm, familiar. Our kids are playing in the yard, laughing, too caught up in their fun to notice I'm home. That realization stings. Jeff notices my disappointment and pulls me into an embrace, kissing me deeply, making me forget, if only for a moment. Even after 14 years, his passion for me hasn't faded. While other women complain about their husbands losing interest, Jeff finds every excuse to be close to me, to touch me, to remind me how much he wants me. He knows exactly what I need, how to turn me on, how to make me feel loved. And yet, I'm about to betray him again. I tell myself it's for our future, for the life I want to build for us. But as I stand in his arms, feeling his love, I wonder if any success will ever be worth the price I'm paying. Reality snaps me back, and my body instinctively reacts to Jeff as it always does. I want him, I always do. But tonight I feel unclean. I pull away using the excuse that the kids might see us. I promise to shower and meet him later, hoping a warm meal and his touch will ease my guilt. After my shower, I break the news about my weekend trip. Jeff, ever understanding, reassures me that it's fine. He'll spend time with the kids. When the house finally quiets, he undresses me, his touch patient and loving. He massages away my tension, making slow, tender love to me before we fall asleep in each other's arms. The next morning, as I get ready for work, I press a kiss to his forehead, silently vowing that this weekend will be the last time I betray him. He deserves so much better. 2 days later, Jeff and the kids drive me to the airport. We take my Volvo instead of his Mustang. He hates stuffing luggage into its small trunk, and the kids kicking his leather seats drives him crazy. My car, on the other hand, is a mess, littered with candy wrappers and gum stuck to the seats. If his looked like this, he'd probably have a meltdown, or a vasectomy. On the plane, I meet Ken and a few colleagues. We fly to the coast, then take a boat to the island. As we step off, I notice its name, La Isla Tentacion. It looks like something out of an old TV show, too picturesque to be real. Staff rush to grab our bags and lead us to check-in. The accommodations are a problem immediately. Ken and I are assigned a shared bungalow. I refuse outright. There's no way I'm risking people finding out. One rumor could destroy my career, not to mention my marriage. Ken looks disappointed but arranges a separate room for me. Exhausted from the trip, I settle in, only to hear a knock minutes later. Ken pushes inside the moment I open the door, already unbuttoning my blouse. I don't resist. I'm too numb to fight it. It's the same as always, rushed, emotionless, over in minutes. When he's done, he thanks me and disappears. I don't know if he's gone to the bar or his own room, and I don't care. I lie there in the dark, crying silently, knowing this is all my doing. I had foolishly thought that, since this would be the last time, he'd at least try to make it meaningful. But it's never been that. There were no dates, no real connection, just rushed encounters in cheap motels. It was never anything more to him than stress relief. I call Jeff, desperate to hear his voice, to feel something real. He tells me what he always does. I can come home whenever I want, even quit my job if I need to. He means it, he always does. His love steadies me. Tomorrow, I have to prove my competence to the other managers and secure their support. Saturday is supposed to be the real work day, followed by a networking event that night. We're scheduled to leave first thing Sunday. At breakfast, Ken drops a bombshell. None of the executive directors are here. It's just the 4 managers. I'm furious, but he insists this is an opportunity to secure a stronger position on the list of potential candidates. After we eat, he leads me to a private bungalow. Inside, I find Alan Jenkins, the accounting manager. I know Al from work, short, overweight, with thick glasses and slicked back hair. He watches me closely, his gaze making me uncomfortable. Ken and Al exchange pleasantries before Ken turns to me. He reminds me that with George Willis retiring soon, competition is fierce. Everyone is fighting for a shot at the open manager position, offering favors, doing whatever they can to get ahead. I already have Ken's vote, but that alone isn't enough. Al is here for a reason. His vote carries weight, and if I want to move up the list, I need his support. I hesitate, but deep down, I know what's expected. My mind races through all the ways I've saved the company money, the efficiency improvements I've implemented. None of it matters. Al shifts nervously as I reach for his zipper. Ken returns exactly 30 minutes later. Before we leave, he smirks and tells me to brush my teeth. I never imagined my ambition would bring me to this. After Ken led me to another bungalow, I knew what was expected. This time, it was Derek Martin. Tall, lean, and one of the most influential figures in the company. Like before, I did what was required, numb to the reality of what I had become. When it was over, Ken returned, wordless, and took me back to my room. I barely had time to shower before he was at my door again. He wasn't finished. I argued that I had already secured 3 out of 4 votes, but he reminded me that George, the outgoing manager, was the most crucial. Without his guidance in the final weeks, I'd struggle to step into his role. George was nearly 80. Even after taking something to help, nothing really happened. I spent almost 90 minutes in that room, trying to make it work. By dinner, I sat alone, sick with self-loathing. The weight of my choices crushed me. I once dreamed of being a powerful woman, a leader. The world preached success at any cost. Just do it, never give up. But no one warned about what those costs might be. I had stepped into a competition I couldn't win on paper. My degrees weren't as prestigious, my experience not as specialized. The only thing I had proven was how much of my soul I was willing to sacrifice. I thought I was making a smart move, a necessary compromise. But Ken had turned me into his personal asset, passing me around like some company perk. Desperate for something real, I called Jeff. I wanted to hear his voice, to feel loved. But before I could, Ken and the other 3 managers showed up at my door for what they considered the main event. One by one, they used me, treating me like nothing more than a means to an end. When they were done, I curled up on the cold floor, empty and disgusted. The next morning, as we waited to board the boat back home, I overheard their conversation. They laughed about what had happened. shocked at how easily I let them do it. Ken bragged that by promoting me, they wouldn't have to worry about a smart young graduate making them look bad. I was the safest choice. Less qualified, less threatening, and most importantly, always available for whatever they wanted. They mocked Jeff, claiming I must not love him, that he wasn't enough for me. They laughed about how I had moaned the night before, assuming it was pleasure rather than pain. I wanted to scream at them to make them stop, but I couldn't. I needed to dry my tears first. As I walked past them toward the upper deck, their voices still rang in my ears. They joked about taking me into a back cabin on the boat, already planning the next time they'd use me. I stared at the horizon as the boat carried me home, the weight of my choices heavier than ever. The road ahead would be long, but I had to find my way back, to myself, to Jeff, to the life I had so carelessly thrown away. During the trip back, I picked up bits of conversation about the island. La Isla Tentacion wasn't just a name, it was exactly what it sounded like. A retreat designed for secrecy, where wealthy executives and influential men could indulge in affairs without fear of exposure. There were no water sports, no guided tours, just a playground for infidelity. Everything revolved around what happened behind closed doors. When I landed and saw Jeff and the kids waiting for me, all I wanted was to hold them tight and never let go. I had spent the entire trip home thinking about how much Jeff meant to me, how different he was from the men I had just left behind. He had never had to beg for my affection. He never questioned whether I wanted him because I always did. I loved satisfying him, sometimes for hours, simply because it brought us both joy. We had even gone through phases where I indulged his every desire. But the difference was, Jeff had always cared about my pleasure, too. Maybe that was the real issue. Maybe it wasn't that those men's wives didn't enjoy closeness. Maybe they just didn't enjoy it with them. I certainly hadn't. And now, after nearly 18 hours of travel, all I wanted was to be in my own home, sink into a hot bath, and let Jeff take care of me like he always did, with love, patience, and tenderness. But I wasn't done yet. As soon as my promotion was confirmed, everything would change. This manager position was just a stepping stone. Once I climbed higher, once I had power, I would make sure every one of those men paid for what they had done to me. The same younger, ambitious employees they feared, I would replace them all. I just needed to make it through the next few days. By midweek, the job would be mine. If that meant enduring a few final humiliations to secure their loyalty, so be it. But the moment I had that title, no man, except my husband, would ever touch me again.
That morning, I had just settled in at work, focused on depreciation calculations, when the phone rang. Distracted, I answered absently, only half paying attention. The woman on the line introduced herself as Claire Higgins, saying she needed to discuss a personal matter. Her formal tone made me pause and sit up straighter. My mind quickly ran through possibilities. Had I done something wrong? She asked if I knew Patty Daniels, and while the name was familiar, I didn't immediately place it. She reminded me that Patty was Ken Daniels' wife, Ken, who worked with Lisa. That jogged my memory. We had met a few times at group dinners, but I barely knew her. Claire insisted we meet in person. I was reluctant. Work was busy, and I had just taken time off to drop Lisa at the airport. But she was persistent. She assured me that once I heard what she had to say, I wouldn't feel like working for the rest of the day. Something in her voice made me uneasy, so I agreed to meet her at noon. By 11:45, I was speeding down the freeway in my Mustang, weaving through sluggish traffic. I hated lunchtime congestion, filled with indecisive drivers and elderly folks creeping along in the fast lane. The address led me to an upscale office building on a busy street. I checked in at the front desk and followed directions to the 5th floor, where I found myself standing before a set of glass doors labeled Customer Services, a vague name that could mean anything. Inside, a receptionist greeted me, though her attention seemed more focused on showing off her exaggerated curves. Tall, overly tanned, and with features so artificially enhanced that they seemed almost cartoonish, she embodied an extreme version of every so-called desirable trait. Yet somehow, the sum of it all was less appealing. She escorted me to an office where 2 women were waiting. One of them, Patty Daniels, was crying. Her striking green eyes and thick brown hair made her instantly recognizable. She wasn't petite, but she had a curvy hourglass figure that most men would find attractive. The other woman, Claire Higgins, was the one who had called me. She got straight to the point. She assured me I wasn't obligated to stay and that she wasn't here to ask for money or ruin my life. Patty had already paid for her services, and whatever information she was about to share, it was mine to use as I saw fit. I had no idea what was coming, but the tension in the room told me it wasn't good. Ken and I were nothing alike. I was a devoted husband and father, while Ken had a history of cheating. Patty had caught him before and warned him that one more time would be the end of their marriage. Claire then mentioned their office secretary. Ken had tried to sleep with her the first time he was brought here. I barely noticed her, but Ken had wasted no time making a move. Then Claire turned on the TV. At first, it was just an empty office, but as she fast-forwarded, Ken appeared on the screen. He worked at his desk for a while until a woman entered, spoke briefly, locked the door, and then knelt in front of him. Patty began crying again. My stomach twisted as I watched, not because Ken was cheating, that wasn't surprising, but because of who was with him. Lisa. There was no mistaking it. Even if the camera hadn't caught her face, I recognized her body, her dress, everything. Shock paralyzed me. 1,000 thoughts and emotions flooded my mind. Why? How long had this been happening? My hands clenched into fists as I struggled to form words. Claire fast-forwarded. Another hotel room, another man, Lisa again, doing the same thing. Then another clip, Lisa with a different man, someone I didn't recognize. Then another, Lisa with an older man, someone twice her age. And the worst, a scene involving all of them at once. I sat frozen, gripping the edge of the table so hard I thought I might break it. My other hand was gripping Patty's. She finally spoke, her voice hollow. She had forgiven Ken too many times, made excuses, blamed work stress, the kids, even herself. Maybe she hadn't been intimate with him enough. Maybe she wasn't skinny enough. But then she looked at Lisa and realized this had nothing to do with appearances. She was done making excuses. She wanted out. Patty had asked Claire to bring me here because she thought I deserved to know. Ken had joked about me, laughed about how I stayed home with the kids while he slept with my wife. He had mocked me in their recordings. My vision blurred with rage. I tried to speak, but Claire cut me off. She warned me, don't make hasty decisions. She advised me to take a breath, think carefully, and call her the next day. But I was done thinking. Nearly 20 years of marriage, and this is what I had? A wife who had turned into a corporate hoe? I slammed my fist on the table. I want this witch out of my life. I don't want her near my kids. Claire remained calm. Then you need to be strategic. The courts don't always side with the wrong party. If you want custody, you need to act as if everything is normal, until we have legal leverage. She asked if I had a lawyer. Patty suggested splitting one to save costs, since our cases were connected. Claire confirmed it was possible. Patty planned to take everything. Full custody, alimony, child support, the family home, half of Ken's pension, and a lawsuit against both Lisa and the company for allowing this workplace affair. I didn't care about revenge. I just wanted Lisa gone, but I would join the lawsuit against the company. I would sue Ken for ruining my life, and I would fight for full custody. My children deserve stability, and I refused to pay a single cent to a woman who had betrayed everything we built. I spoke with more anger than I intended, but I meant every word. Claire's voice remained calm as she advised me to keep my emotions in check. If I went home looking furious, Lisa would know something was wrong. She assured me that a lawyer's appointment was set for the next day and that the divorce papers could be ready by the end of the week. I needed to get tested for STDs. Just the thought of it made my stomach churn. I muttered that I'd try to calm down before heading home, though I wasn't sure how. As I left, Patty squeezed my hand gently, offering to talk if I ever needed someone. I nodded in thanks and walked out, my mind still spinning. When I got home, I forced myself into routine. I handed the kids their after-school snacks, checked the freezer for dinner, and went through the motions on autopilot. Outwardly, I looked normal. Inside, I was unraveling. I pulled out hot dogs for the kids and steaks for Lisa and me. Just thinking about her name sent a fresh wave of anger through me. To shake it off, I played with the kids in the yard, their laughter a temporary escape. A couple of neighborhood kids joined in, and I sat on the porch swing, watching them run around. But my mind wouldn't stop. Why? I knew there were two sides to every story, but I couldn't imagine any explanation that could justify what I had seen. I wasn't some old-fashioned fool. I understood that relationships had complexities, that some people had open marriages or unmet needs. But this wasn't a one-time mistake. Lisa's actions were habitual, effortless. The way she casually serviced Ken in his office, like it was just another task on her to-do list, told me this had been going on for a long time. And then there was the island trip. Had it been like that every time she traveled for work? Had she been sleeping with every man who gave her the slightest hint? I knew the straightforward approach would be to confront her the moment she walked through the door, demand answers, and file for divorce. But Lisa hadn't been honest with me, so she didn't deserve honesty in return. More importantly, I needed to protect my children. That meant playing this carefully, following expert advice, and ensuring I had the upper hand when it mattered most. And then there was Ken. That bastard had sat in my home, eaten at my table, pretended to be nothing more than a coworker. He hadn't just had an affair with my wife, he had passed her around. He had to pay for this. Patty was already divorcing him, but that wasn't enough. I needed my own justice. As I stewed over my next steps, Lisa pulled into the driveway. Normally, I would have gotten up to greet her. Tonight, it took effort just to look in her direction. She walked up to me, arms open, and hugged me as if nothing had changed. I forced myself to hug her back, but there was no warmth in it. She noticed. Still, she smiled playfully and hinted at something more, inviting me inside to watch her change. I forced a casual tone. I need to keep an eye on the kids. They've been a little too wild today, maybe too much sugar. Why don't you change and then come sit with me for a while? She smiled and went inside. The moment she was out of sight, I exhaled sharply and rubbed my forehead. I needed to get it together. I'd wasted too much time wondering why she did it, what I had done wrong, or what I hadn't done right. But the truth was simple. She was the one who ruined everything. The idea of being intimate with Lisa made me sick. I wasn't taking any chances, especially with my STD test results still pending. Looking back, I was relieved that the night I picked her up from the airport, she had only wanted a massage before falling asleep. At the time, I'd been frustrated, but now I saw it as a blessing. Less than a day ago, I had wanted her. Now I was actively avoiding her. By the time she came back outside, I was busy grilling. The neighbors had stopped by to pick up their kids, and I had invited them to stay for dinner, using the opportunity to keep myself distracted. I ended up stuck in a conversation with Ted, my painfully dull neighbor, about baseball and lawnmowers. He droned on about his Toyota Prius, convinced it was some kind of chick magnet. I nearly laughed out loud at the thought. I humored him with sarcastic remarks about speed and efficiency, but deep down, I was just using him to avoid Lisa. That night, I pretended to be asleep when she climbed into bed and kept up the act the next morning. Patty called during the day, and we talked for a while. She updated me on Claire's plan to break the news to Lisa and Ken and mentioned that Claire had a ruthless side. That meant I had to keep up the charade a little longer, but I could manage. By Thursday, I told Lisa I had a business trip for the weekend. A week without intimacy had made her irritable. But I reminded her that she had left me to handle everything the previous weekend. Since my parents were taking the kids to visit family, she had no reason to complain. That seemed to settle her down. As I packed, she watched me closely. My bag contained running gear, sunglasses, and swim trunks, things that didn't exactly scream business. Suspicious, she asked where I was going. I casually pulled out the brochure Claire had given me. The moment she read the name La Isla Tentacion, all the color drained from her face.
This weekend was supposed to be a turning point. By Monday, my company would announce me as the new manager after George's retirement. I had managed to keep my distance from Ken, only sleeping with him once in the past week. He wasn't happy about it, but that was his problem. This arrangement was over. What unsettled me more was Jeff's behavior. He had been avoiding me since I got back from the resort. He wasn't just uninterested in love, he barely wanted to be around me. This was unheard of. In all our years together, Jeff had never once pulled away like this. A horrible thought crept in. Was he cheating? The idea filled me with rage, but maybe I was just projecting my own guilt. Jeff wasn't the type to have an affair. But then again, neither was I. And yet that's exactly what I had been doing. I had convinced myself I was putting family first, but in reality, I had sacrificed everything for this job. I needed to fix it. The problem was, how? I couldn't tell Jeff not to go to the island without revealing what it really was. But did he even know? His suitcase full of sports gear made me think someone had set up this trip without telling everyone the real purpose. If he figured it out, would he be tempted? I had neglected him for months. Could I really blame him if he found comfort elsewhere? Jeff was still handsome, successful, desirable. There were plenty of divorced or single women at his office who would happily take my place, even if just for a night. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to remind him what he had, show him that no other woman could give him what I could. But that plan failed spectacularly. That night, when I reached for him, he barely reacted. Instead of pulling me close, he kissed my forehead like I was some damn pet and turned away. When I asked why he'd been avoiding me, he shrugged it off, saying he needed to save his energy for the trip. Furious, I barely slept. My dreams tormented me. Visions of Jeff with some young, gorgeous engineer who had never given birth, her perfect body pressed against his. Worse, I imagined him coming home and looking at me the way he had all week. That expression said everything. I love my old Mustang. But those new models sure are tempting. Maybe it's time for an upgrade. When I woke up, still burning with anger, I smacked him on the head before storming off to work. At the office, Ken's mood was different. The usual smirk was gone, replaced with irritation. I had planned to offer him one final time before the announcement on Monday, but when I approached, he barely looked at me. Instead, he dismissed me outright. He wasn't in the mood. I had heard that phrase far too often lately. Something was wrong. Ken muttered about Patty acting strange, saying she suddenly insisted he take the kids to her parents for the weekend. She claimed she had a business trip. That hit me like a warning bell. I tried to play it off, suggesting maybe she was trying to get back at him, make him understand what it felt like to handle everything alone. Ken looked at me like I was an idiot. Patty didn't have a job. How could she be going on a business trip? His voice shook as he revealed where she was going. La Isla Tentacion. The realization hit me like a slap. Ken broke down, finally admitting the truth. Their marriage was a facade. They had stayed together for the kids. He had cheated multiple times, and the last time, Patty had sworn that if he did it again, she would destroy him financially. She even painted the picture. He'd be living under a bridge, eating canned tuna for the rest of his life. Ken hated tuna. That's when it all clicked. I remembered how Jeff had looked at Patty during our double dates. She was younger than me, curvier, still stunning even after 2 kids. Ken always complained that Patty wasn't interested in closeness, but now I understood. It wasn't because she had lost interest in intimacy. She had lost interest in him. Panic surged through me. This wasn't a coincidence. Jeff was leaving this weekend too, and he was going to the same island. We exchanged a look, both of us struck by the same realization. Patty had left at 7 a.m., Jeff was leaving at 9. I had 2 hours. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and ran. The elevator was broken, forcing me to sprint down 7 flights of stairs. My legs burned, my chest ached, but I couldn't stop. Bursting out of the building, I jumped into my Volvo and sped toward the airport. I had to get there before it was too late. Nothing about this day was going right. My car, which had never failed me in 10 years, refused to start. There was no time to deal with it, so I left it in the parking lot and jumped into a taxi, urging the driver to get me to the airport as fast as possible. The moment I stepped into the terminal, I broke into a sprint, weaving through the crowds, dodging slow walkers, and narrowly avoiding suitcases in my path. Just as I reached the departure area, an elderly man bent down to tie his shoe. There was no time to stop. My only choice was to leap over him. I miscalculated. My foot clipped his shoulder, throwing me off balance. The last thing I saw was the ground rushing up to meet me before everything went black. When I came to, I was in a small, brightly lit medical room, my jaw aching and my chin throbbing. The impact had caused my teeth to snap together, breaking a couple in the process. A deep bruise spread across my chin, and a small cut had required stitches. As I adjusted my skirt, a security guard walked in, eyeing me with a mix of confusion and amusement. Apparently, I had been searched while unconscious, and to make things worse, the old man I had tripped over was suing me for $1 million. He wasn't even hurt. Before I could process the absurdity of the situation, I was taken to another room for a psychiatric evaluation. The woman questioning me didn't seem impressed when I admitted that my decision to jump over a grown man had been inspired by childhood memories of old O.J. Simpson commercials. The conversation spiraled fast, with her implying I had murderous tendencies and was chasing after my husband with intent to liquidate. Frustrated, I left, only to be handed a stack of paperwork, including a subpoena and a bill for the psychiatric exam. With no time to dwell on it, I rushed to the ticket counter. The next flight left in 15 minutes, but the cost was outrageous. I had no choice but to pay. Pain throbbed in my jaw throughout the flight, and by the time I landed, Jeff's plane had already taken off. I still had to wait for the ferry, which only ran every 2 hours. To make matters worse, I wasn't on the guest list, so I had to pay extra just to board. When I finally arrived on the island, I scanned the crowd, desperate to spot Jeff before it was too late. But he was nowhere in sight. Just as frustration hit its peak, I heard his laugh. It sent a jolt through me. It had been so long since I had heard him laugh like that. I turned and saw him. He wasn't with Patty. He was with someone else, a tall blonde, stunning, effortlessly beautiful. She leaned in close, hanging onto every word, her fingers grazing his arm as she laughed. Minutes later, they got up and left. But instead of heading toward the main hotel, they walked toward the bungalows. My stomach twisted. The bungalows were private, secluded. No one cared what happened there. I followed them, moving through the trees and bushes, rage building with every step. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, a second blonde, even younger, knocked on the door and was let inside. That's when I saw Jeff's luggage. The first woman had a keycard. They were sharing a room. A million thoughts raced through my head, none of them rational. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight to the door and pounded on it. Laughter spilled from inside, growing louder as I grabbed the knob and twisted. It wasn't locked. I threw the door open, ready to catch him in the act. But instead of finding Jeff tangled in bed with two blondes, I saw a conference table. Jeff sat there, deep in discussion with the two women and another man. I had crashed into a business meeting. Jeff sat across from a woman he had lunch with, while another young blonde woman chewed gum nearby. A middle-aged woman with brown hair sat beside him. When Jeff looked up at me, his face was filled with sadness, and I immediately felt a pang in my chest. My mind raced. I had made a mistake. They were all fully dressed, papers scattered on the table. Jeff's voice was choked as he greeted me, but I could sense something was off. I asked him what was going on, but he only said they were preparing papers for me, which made no sense at all. The blonde woman stood up and called my name, confirming it was me before handing me a stack of papers. She casually remarked that I had been served, and that it had been the easiest job she'd ever done, leaving without any more words. I stood frozen, staring at the divorce papers. At first, it felt like a bad joke, but seeing the serious expressions on Jeff and the blondes' faces, I realized it was real. I tried to explain that I didn't want a divorce, but Jeff seemed resolute, admitting he had neglected both me and the kids. The woman beside him pressed for details, and I fumbled through an explanation, trying to justify my absence with work, but nothing I said seemed to make sense. I tried to lighten the mood, mentioning how hard it was to balance a career and family, but no one was laughing. The woman was blunt, asking what exactly I did while Jeff managed everything for the children. I stumbled over my words, explaining that I was their mother, but that wasn't enough. The woman, after listening, declared she'd grant Jeff temporary custody and left, leaving me with the papers and an overwhelming sense of dread. I tried apologizing to Jeff, insisting I had made mistakes, but that divorce wasn't the answer. But he was clear. It wasn't about neglecting the kids, it was about my affair. He played a video, one that made me sick to my stomach. I begged for an explanation, but the woman advised me to get legal counsel before speaking further. She informed me that Jeff's divorce proposal was only valid for a few days, after which he would file on grounds of adultery, and the evidence would ruin my career. Jeff was clear that he made more than enough money for me to never work again, but everything I'd done, he said, had been for myself. I couldn't deny it. I pleaded for one more chance, asking if leaving my job would make things right. But Jeff, cold and distant, wasn't interested in talking until I hired a lawyer. As he and the blonde woman gathered the papers and headed to the dock, I ran after them, begging for a second chance, even suggesting a weekend alone to work things out. But Jeff was done. He needed to go home to his kids and start rebuilding his life. I tried to reason with him, but it was clear he was no longer listening. The porters loaded his luggage onto the boat, pushing me aside when I couldn't pay the fare, and the boat left without me. Stranded and desperate, I called work, only to be met with anger and blame from Ken, who accused me of ruining everything for him, too. The call ended abruptly. As I waited for the next boat, the reality of the situation hit me. The divorce, the video, the lies, it all felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape. I called Ken from my phone, but he didn't pick up immediately. When he finally did, he was breathless, furious. He blamed me for everything, saying I ruined his life and that he was going to lose everything, his family, his home, because of me. Then he hung up. While I was still reeling from the call, I saw the boat I was supposed to be on pull away, leaving me stranded. I had to wait for another one and pay an outrageous fee for the privilege. When I got home, I found a truck pulling away, a lock replacement service truck. I tried the door, locked. A feeling of dread washed over me. I called my parents and went to stay with them for a while, telling them that Jeff and I were having issues, but not explaining why. Mom assured me that Jeff and I would work things out, but Dad was more direct, asking where the kids were. I told him they were with Jeff's parents, and he didn't seem convinced. Later he told me he wasn't taking sides, but he still seemed to be making a point that Jeff was probably suffering too. That Sunday, Mom and I went through old photo albums, talking about happy memories, but I couldn't shake the overwhelming sadness. I had spent most of my adult life with Jeff, over 20 years, and now everything seemed to be falling apart. By the time dinner rolled around, I was in tears, wishing I could go back in time and fix things. Dad came home late, as usual, with some drawings from the kids. The first one was of Jeff, the kids, and me. Jeff and the kids were smiling, but I was drawn apart from them, looking sad. Dad pointed out that the kids knew something was wrong, even if no one had told them. He talked about how Jeff had been hurting and how he tried to ask my father for help, but didn't want to admit what was really going on. He said Jeff was trying to hold everything together, but couldn't. After a while, I changed my approach and tried calling Jeff again, but this time I asked him directly what he had done. Maybe he needed someone to talk to. His response was short. "I need to ask you." I could hear the pain in his voice, but it was clear he wasn't ready to open up. Mom's patience was wearing thin, but Dad remained firm, telling me that I needed to fix things. He said it didn't matter what had happened. I needed to apologize and go home. He even suggested I quit my job. He said Jeff was exhausted from trying to do it all on his own, and I had to come back and be there for him and the kids. I didn't have a response to that, so I just started crying. It felt like I was losing everything. My family, my marriage, and I didn't know how to fix it. Mom gave Dad a quick look before leading me to my room, while Dad just rolled his eyes and sat down in front of the TV. I spent the night tossing and turning, my mind overwhelmed by nightmares. The next day, the one that was supposed to be my big moment, felt like a hollow victory. Jeff wasn't there to share it with me, and somehow, everything seemed empty. I arrived at work the following morning ready to get started. However, when I tried to clock in, the system rejected my time card. After multiple failed attempts, I remembered that I no longer had to swipe in since I had been promoted to manager. I smiled to myself, thinking I was ready to take on the day. But when I got to my desk, I noticed that Ken's office was still dark. I tried logging into my computer, but my credentials were also denied. Confused, I realized I was supposed to be working with George until I took over his position. I made my way to his office where the light was on, but George was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to leave, a young man I had seen around the office but didn't know walked in and dropped a large stack of paperwork on the desk. At first, I thought George had left a huge mess for me to clean up, but the guy casually mentioned that George didn't handle any of that work. In fact, he had been fired, not retired. The realization hit me hard. George had left me in a tough spot, and now I had to figure things out on my own. What was worse, this new guy seemed to think he was going to take over my job. As I stood there trying to process what had just happened, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. It was Eunice Parker, our HR manager, asking me to come with her. She seemed to sense my distress and reassured me as we walked out of the office. Once outside, she apologized, admitting that she had planned to handle things earlier, but had been dealing with personal issues at home. Her husband had been abusive the night before, which explained her late arrival to work. Though I felt sympathy for her, it did little to ease my own spiraling thoughts. When we reached her office, Eunice quickly sorted through papers and handed me a file with my full work history. She told me to head up to the boardroom where the team was waiting for me. As I knocked and entered, I was greeted by 7 serious faces, none of them welcoming. Even the lone woman at the table looked grim. It was clear they needed someone who could bring energy and fresh ideas, but their worn-out expressions made it obvious they were hardly the right people to guide me. I tried to muster a smile, hoping to convey my enthusiasm, but before I could say anything, one of the men sharply called me a derogatory name. The woman next to him didn't mince words either, immediately questioning whether I could stop being so oblivious long enough to discuss the matter at hand. The hostility was palpable. She then began explaining the reason for my dismissal, and everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I was drenched in cold water. For a moment, I thought I had been attacked, but I realized one of the men had thrown the water from a vase on the table. Apparently, it had contained some pungent flower nutrients. In a daze, I demanded to know if I had been fired, and the response came quickly. Yes, I was terminated. Worse, the company was considering suing me for the damage my actions had caused to their reputation. They explained that my personal issues, including the affair with Jeff, had severely affected their image and could lead to a public scandal. The men went on to say they'd considered legal action to recover their expenses, but decided it was easier to simply fire me in disgrace. I wouldn't receive severance, recommendations, or any positive references. In fact, they advised me to never mention working for them again. They legally couldn't trash me publicly, but behind the scenes, they would make sure everyone knew the details. As I turned to leave, I overheard one of them asking if anyone had once again peed in the flower vase. My head was spinning, and I couldn't make sense of the chaos unfolding around me. 2 security guards escorted me out, and I requested to collect my personal belongings. They told me my things had already been packed, and my box of personal effects was waiting for me. As the elevator doors opened, I came face to face with Patty, who was just exiting. I opened my mouth to apologize, but before I could get a word out, she slapped me so hard that I saw stars. A blonde woman from the island appeared and began escorting Patty away. She turned to me with an apologetic expression, explaining that Patty had been under a lot of stress and was also planning to sue the company, separately from Jeff. It seemed like everything was falling apart. I entered the elevator, the weight of everything pressing on me. The ride down to the first floor felt endless, and when the doors opened, another security guard joined us, handing me a large box filled with office supplies and my personal belongings. On top of the pile was a photo of me from my first day at work, now defaced with crude drawings, small withered bosoms and a mustache, and the word witch scrawled across the photo in big, bold letters. The box was filled with random office supplies that didn't belong to me, including paper clips, pens, and other items I had never owned. I pointed this out to the guard, who just laughed and shrugged it off. "No one wants any of this stuff anymore. It's all yours now," he said dismissively. When the elevator doors opened, the guards looked at me with cold expressions. One of them muttered, "See you later," and I walked out into the parking garage. As I stepped away from the elevator, someone slammed into me, knocking me to the ground. The box I was carrying spilled open, and the man on top of me started hitting me. Security quickly pulled him off, and I realized it was Al. Just days ago, he'd been with me on the island. Now he was trying to hurt me. "You and your pimp ruined my life," he yelled. "I lost my damn job, and now my wife's divorcing me." He kept trying to hit me, even as the guards restrained him, laughing at the situation. "Better get out of here, lady," one of them sneered. "I can't believe what she got from you, damn Uox," the other guard chuckled. I left the mess behind, walking to my car, and as I approached, I saw a familiar face standing next to it. The tall blonde woman, still chewing gum, eyed me with amusement before smiling. "This is my first," she said. "Never served the same person with a subpoena twice in 3 days. Here you go." Confused, I took the papers from her and asked, "Wait, is Jeff changing our divorce agreement? He said I have a week to decide and I don't even have a lawyer yet." She shook her head. "No, it's something else." She smiled sweetly. "Good luck, though. Have a nice day. I hate to do this, but you've been served." She walked away, swinging her hips as she caught the attention of a few men nearby. I looked down at the papers in my hand and couldn't believe my eyes. Ken had sued me for inappropriate conduct. I sat in my car and immediately dialed his number. When he picked up, he told me, "I shouldn't talk to you," before hanging up. Furious, I tried to get answers. "Why the hell did you sue me?" I demanded. "You started it," he whined. "I can't control myself. I'm like Tiger Woods. I'm a love-obsessed. I tried to stop and be a faithful husband, but you made me start over by satisfying me. You're a threat." He hung up, leaving me more confused than ever. I called Jeff's office next, only to learn he had taken a week off to handle personal matters. Pulling into the driveway, I saw Jeff's Mustang in the garage just as he arrived home. I rushed toward him, desperate to talk, but he slammed the door in my face. I knocked on the door, but a few minutes later, Polly arrived, and Jeff had already gotten a restraining order against me. My parents had to bail me out of jail. Over the next few weeks, I could only communicate with Jeff through our lawyers. I fought the divorce with everything I had. I watched the house every day, hoping for a chance to see the kids. Jeff let me visit them when I wanted, but it wasn't the same as having him there. Jeff started meeting with Patty for dinner, though nothing romantic came of it. Once Patty's divorce was finalized and her lawsuit against my company was resolved, she moved out of state, selling the house she had shared with Ken. I heard Ken had been attacked before he left and dropped his lawsuit against me before disappearing. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jeff might have been involved. One by one, the company's former managers were let go, and most of them were facing divorces, except for George, who was a widower. The stress took its toll on him, and his health worsened, eventually landing him in the hospital. Then, about a month into my divorce battle, I received surprising news. I was pregnant. Knowing how much Jeff adored being a father, I was certain he couldn't walk away from this child. My lawyer reached out to him, and Jeff agreed to provide support during my pregnancy. This gave me a small window, about 7 months, to try and rebuild what was broken. During this time, Jeff brought the kids to visit me a couple of times a week, but he never spoke to me directly. Eventually, I cornered him. "Jeff, I know you hate me, but we need to talk. I don't want our kids to grow up apart," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't want that either," he replied, "so I'll seek custody of this child too." His words stunned me, but what he said next was even worse. "If it's mine," he added. I broke down and ran away, unable to contain my tears. As the weeks passed, my pregnancy became increasingly complicated, and I was hospitalized. Doctors ran genetic tests on the baby, but there were no abnormalities. However, when the results came back, they revealed that Jeff wasn't the father. He'd managed to get DNA samples from Patty's children, but it wasn't a match. Al was also ruled out, and since the baby didn't have any African American genes, only one person was left to test. It was George. And he had died the day after he was confirmed as the father. That was the final blow. Jeff proceeded with the divorce. In the end, he received full physical custody of the kids. He kept the house until the children were grown, at which point we'd sell it and split the proceeds. We divided everything else evenly. We each kept our pension funds, though mine was practically empty, which didn't seem fair to me. As the months passed and my baby grew, Jeff kept visiting until the day of his birth. He didn't come into the delivery room or do the things he had done when we had our children together, but I didn't hold that against him. I had made the choice to place the child for adoption. I wanted him to have a better life with parents who could give him the love I couldn't. I didn't want him to grow up seeing me every day as a reminder of my biggest mistake. Finding a job proved to be difficult. 6 months after the birth, I was working as a waitress, scraping by. Then my mom's friend called with a possible job. She needed a housekeeper for one of her clients. The pay wasn't great, just a few $100s a week, but it was a live-in position, so I could save a lot of it. Since I didn't enjoy waiting tables, I decided to go for an interview, hoping that it would be a stepping stone to something better. When my mom's friend drove me to the house, my heart was racing. I knew this neighborhood well. Hell, I knew this house. As the door opened, Jeff greeted me with a handshake and led me into the kitchen. We discussed the terms, and we both agreed on something that worked for both of us. He would have someone take care of the house and children while he worked, and I would have the chance to be close to my kids as they grew up. I hinted early on that if Jeff was willing to communicate, I'd be open to providing additional services. About a month later, I showed up at his room in a robe, pretending I had forgotten myself from years of habit. Jeff smiled, but his eyes told me he wanted me. I ended up in bed with him that night and I pulled him close, trying to kiss him. "I love you, Jeff," I whispered, my voice full of longing. But when he heard me, he stopped and pulled away, his face full of regret. "I'm so sorry, Lisa," he said. "This should never have happened." It never happened again. It took me days to process it. I knew it was my fault. I had walked into his room without clothes, and he hadn't been with anyone since we were last together. He was weak. He had tried to move on, and I only complicated things. Eventually, we found a new, more comfortable friendship. Soon after, Jeff started dating again. The first woman was strict with me, and I didn't like her at all. Fortunately, their relationship was short-lived. The next one lasted longer, and we actually became friends. I think it was because of me that she ended things. The situation was just too strange for her. Diana was probably the third or fourth woman Jeff dated, and from the moment she stepped into the house, I knew it was her. She was beautiful, confident, and had an energy that matched Jeff's. I could already picture them together, doing things that I could no longer do. She glowed whenever he was around, and I could tell it was only a matter of time before I became the third wheel. I started talking to my parents about moving back home. I didn't want to stick around and make things awkward for everyone, especially the kids. Diana came to see me one day while Jeff was at work. "We need to talk," she said. I nodded. "Don't worry, I'm probably moving out next weekend." But she looked at me with sincerity. "That's not what I wanted to talk about. Why would you leave?" "I love your kids, but I'm not their mother. I can't even boil water. Jeff loves me and he'll never cheat on me, but he loves you too. I know what you did, and I know you love him. You hurt him, Lisa, but he still wants you around." I tried to interrupt, but she stopped me. "I grew up in a place where polygamy was common," she continued. "No, we're not doing that. But I think there's enough love here for all of us." And so, we made it work. The three of us lived together for several years, and though we never considered a threesome, Diana and I became close friends. Jeff and Diana made me feel like part of the family. 5 years later, I met someone else. He was older, and he wasn't Jeff, but I had moved on. Jeff and Diana were at our wedding, and I saw my children often. I will always love Jeff, and I'm grateful for his forgiveness. Even though he never said the words, his actions spoke volumes about his capacity to forgive. A lesser man might have tried to hurt me or kept me away from my kids forever. A man with less character might have kept me around, using me for closeness, trying to humiliate me for my past mistakes. But Jeff was different. It took someone special with a huge heart to resist that temptation and offer me a chance at friendship. Diana and I became really good friends. We may have been different in many ways, but we each needed the other. I relied on her to help care for my kids, since I couldn't be there full time, and she looked to me as a reminder of the importance of balancing ambition with family. She learned from my mistakes, understanding that there are things in life you just can't sacrifice, like your marriage and your family. Looking back, I still can't believe I threw away the man I loved and the family I had, all for a job that didn't even last. Every time I catch Diana gazing at Jeff, she knows exactly what she stands to lose if she makes a mistake, and she hugs him a little tighter each time.